Hello, and welcome to our first digital Talk Culture Mile about business reframing. I'm Elizabeth Mishler, Partnerships and Strategic Projects Manager at Culture Mile, and my co-host who will be helping with all things technical is Nadia Perrier, PR and Marketing Manager of Integrity International Group. So a few things to let you know before we get started. We are recording the session. What is Culture Mile, and why are we hosting this discussion today? Culture Mile is the City of London's cultural district, stretching from Farringdon through to Moorgate, led by the City of London Corporation, alongside the Barbican, Guildhall School of Music and Drama, London Symphony Orchestra, and the Museum of London. Culture Mile champions its unique creative enterprise ecosystem, and we are developing Culture Mile as a global hub of creativity, innovation, and learning that delivers economic growth and social mobility for London. It is therefore important to us to ensure that businesses, organizations, and individuals within our community, that they are able to navigate their way through this challenging period. And that is why we are running this session today. Now, our three panelists joining today are all members of the Culture Mile Network, sharing a deep-rooted commitment to transforming the area and the role of culture and creativity within that. So today we want to look at business reframing, investigating how some of our local businesses right here in the city are imaginatively reframing or pivoting in response to COVID-19, adapting what they do, trend spotting, and allocating resources in these uncertain times. We all know that the world we are working in has changed. Businesses and independents across all sectors are looking to find new ways to remain relevant and resilient. The need for creativity and innovation has never been greater, and we at Culture Mile believe that there is much to be gained by looking across sectors and learning from each other. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. Tony Matharu is chairman of Blue Orchid Hotels and vice president of the London COVID-19 Response Initiative, Here to Help London. He is an award-winning entrepreneur, hotelier, and philanthropist, having received awards for Best Small Hotel Company, his contribution to London's success, and technology and innovation. A recipient of an honorary doctorate of letters, a fellow of ESCP Europe Business School, and a freeman of the Guild of Entrepreneurs, Tony is a regular advisor and commentator on entrepreneurship, hospitality, and philanthropy. Sharon is curator of the art collection at Linklaters and an independent art advisor with a strong background in the field of contemporary and modern art. Catherine established and ran Vertigo Gallery in Shoreditch from 2000 to 2010. She has managed Linklaters' art collection for the last 10 years, as well as commissioning and sourcing artworks for a range of blue chip companies. And Ami Shapiro is founder of Innovation Warehouse and angel collective Innovation Warehouse Capital. He is a serial entrepreneur and has a track record of achieving rapid business growth through a combination of financial, commercial, and technical skills. Ami has co-founded and mentored numerous commercial enterprises in a variety of markets, ranging from software systems to property development. So let's hand this all over to them. To begin our conversation, I have asked each panelist this question. How has your work changed since COVID-19? And what process have you gone through to adapt or reframe? So Tony, let's begin with you, please.
You're all very welcome. COVID-19 is exceptional in many senses, but it's the same in some sense. Pandemics are not an exception generally in human history. Depending on how far you look back, they are the rule. And viruses themselves have been around for over 300 million years. Things are never the same after a pandemic, so things will change. It's definitely going to affect the way in which we work, we travel, we behave. Will another million people be in the air at the time that we go into lockdown, as happened recently, flying in what people call the flying petri dish in the air? What will happen with global trade? Local manufacturing, is it going to happen more rather than global? Are we going to take more time with our preparation on our stocks? Is independent security going to be a higher priority? How are we going to work with collaboration and partnerships? These are all matters that we need to consider, whatever the crisis. In fact, in my personal experience, they're exactly the same kind of things that we needed to think about when planes flew into the World Trade Center at 7/7, and the terrorist attacks in London, volcanic ash cloud, even now preparing for Brexit and the 2008 credit crisis. They're all things where there were crises. People didn't really know what was going to happen. They didn't really know how to react to it and respond. I'm going to talk in a couple of moments about how people typically respond in crisis. And to bring it back to my personal situation, they can happen whilst this pandemic is global, and to that extent it really is unprecedented. Personally, you can be involved in a business that other people can disrupt, and it can be disadvantageous to you. In my case, when that happened, I had to think about some core values that are going to be relevant for the business going on. What are things that we can live by, and not just generally, but even if there's a crisis, how can we rely upon those core values and take appropriate measures, innovate around those values, generate loyalty and revenue, develop relationships and partnerships, collaborate, find new audiences. How can I do that, whatever the circumstances, whether it's a 7/7 or whether it's a pandemic? And I think that really is the relevant thing, that this is a very personal thing to all of us. We can talk about fatal statistics. We can even make, in my view, probably not entirely sensible comparisons with European fatalities and other things. But the fact is, there are loved ones who are lost. There are relationships which are irreparably damaged. There's vulnerable people, elderly and others. There's mental illness. There's educational disadvantage. There's societal, not necessarily personal changes. There's separation and isolation. And in fact, on business, and in particular in the arts and the creative world, there are very serious disruptions where relationships and stability is extremely disrupted. So on that last point, economic and financial distress is definitely here. How are we going to encounter that? What have I done? What should we be doing when we face a crisis like this COVID-19 pandemic? So the first thing I did is I started to look at my experience with other crises, and I've just related to others that I've experienced, and in particular light of my most recent crisis, which is the disruption to my business. And these are, in my view, what happened. The first stage is denial. We're in denial. We're unsure about information. What is it? How's it going to affect me? Isn't it awful? And some people go into a state of hibernation. The second stage is anxiety. We get anxious. We know that it's bad. We're not quite sure how bad. We want to mobilize. We want to be energetic. We want to be busy. We're not quite sure what we ought to do. And then we move from anxiety into adjustment. And we take steps to mitigate our potential downsides. We furlough staff if that's what's relevant in this particular case. We prepare for what I call stage 4, and that is when we reevaluate. We plan, we apply the measures that perhaps we planned for. And I think you can apply those to COVID-19 and what we've done as a business, what I've done personally. And in fact, you can apply that to pretty much any of the situations. In 7/7, when bombs were going off in Aldgate and on buses in Bloomsbury, rather than hibernate and run away, we decided to send out staff. We bought all the sleeping bags we could, because we knew that there was going to be an awkward situation. We set up a triage in one of our hotels. When the tsunami happened in Boxing Day, instead of thinking how awful it's affecting people away, far away, we started to collect revenue, dry goods, other things, so we could respond to that crisis. The same in Nepal, in the earthquakes, or Pakistan in 2005, in Kashmir. So some people will hibernate. It's all too big. They don't really know what to do. Those people have lived through some of these and have got some crisis management mentality. They firstly want to validate the information. In my view, the information on COVID-19 has been very tricky. Is 2 meters the right distance? I don't know. What is R? What assumptions are made for R? Do they take into account particularly vulnerable groups, the BAME community, those people who are fat, those people who are subjected to other illnesses like diabetes. So we get the information, we need to validate it, we need to establish whether or not it's valid. Then we need to, in the anxiety phase, we need to combat that by good communication with our teams, with our clients, with our partners. And we need to offer clarity and direction, and we need to take responsibility. And I think that's the second phase in any crisis, and in particular, that's what I tried to do, remembering and recording what had happened in the past. And then we're moving on to the adjustment phase, which is where I think we all are now. Excuse me. So we have to take steps to mitigate, and we're wondering what we're going to do with our staff. In my particular industry, of course, hotels it's not lawful to be running hotels and having people sleep and stay in your accommodation unless they're key workers and frontline workers or those supporting those services. So our business is effectively closed, pretty much as all other hotels in this country. Venues, football stadiums and cricket grounds and so on. They can't operate. They can't operate at all. So you need to pivot and reach and change. Look at where there is a need. Look at where there is support. And going back to the 7/7 and rushing out and buying sleeping bags, that was exactly what I thought about. It was exactly what we did in this instance. We gave real clarity to our teams about what support was going to be needed. We knew we were going to innovate and adapt. It meant that we might need to repurpose our properties, as we did. And we need to demonstrate solidarity amongst our teams and with our clients. We need to make changes, and we need to prepare for the final phase, which is the recovery and regeneration phase, which can't be done unless there's been proper planning. So while in my case, I'm still considering and establishing what information is really valid, and what is true, what needs to be done. I did look ahead and I foresaw what might happen using my experience of sort of crisis management in the past, and how I thought we could deal with the current crisis. In practice, what does that mean? In practice, that meant that rather than closing down our hotels and hibernating, what I decided to do was to appeal to the community, find out about key workers, work out where the need was, were nurses, doctors, other people who are responding to the need, where they're going to stay, people who are self-isolating, people who are stranded, what are they going to need, and then respond to it. That perhaps was in a tangent to what most people in my industry were doing, which was closing down, hunkering down, laying off staff, making them redundant, and deciding that we'll just wait until this thing's over. Understanding and empathizing with the vulnerable is something that I think has to happen in a crisis, and where you've got valid partnerships, and where you're used to swimming against the tide, where you can empathize with frontline workers and others, and you have the capacity to make a change. That's what we in fact thought about, and that's what we did. So we were immediately on the front foot, and the result is that we've accommodated over 4,500 room nights, served over 27,000 meals, set up an establishment called Here to Help London as a restricted fund under a charity that we're involved with. And then we've leveraged some opportunities that other people have started. So things like face shields, where they were producing 100, 150 a day. It's now up to 10,000 as a result of some finance that we provided, that we could pump prime some of their activity and respond to the need. So yes, we got busy. We went through all those phases of questioning the information, feeling anxious, and then wanting to make adjustments. And that is a continuing, evolving thing, that a bit like a tugboat. We can nip in and out and perhaps offer more strength than would at first seem, rather than a big ocean liner that finds it really difficult to change direction. And I think having values that underpin all of that, and having nimble ideas that can go with that, I think that's where we started. And I would say that it was instinctive. People say, why is this instinctive? Surely this has got to be something that was pre-planned and forethought, but it's not. Whilst you can't ignore the actual risk, and in self-isolation here, of course, that's not what I'm doing. Your predictions could be based on hope, or your hope actually could turn into a prediction. And that often, if you read the media, that's what happens. They predict that this is going to happen, and then it turns into a hope, and hope turns into a prediction. And actually, there may not be some underlying truth behind all of that. As this virus has developed, the responses, rather like the politics on it, have got to be more nuanced. And following the science has gone from sort of medical and statistical, and now I believe it's much more behavioural. Of course, if you don't articulate exactly what the science is, then you wouldn't respond to it accordingly. But I believe that's probably where we are. We're now looking at behavioural science, not just economic, and certainly not statistical, because they're now questioning the statistics of it. And I link it to being instinctive to the extent of fighting fire with fire. And from what I can recollect of that was a group of people who were being flown in Canada to respond to a fire out on the plains, miles from anywhere. And there was an old, wise and experienced leader who was dropped down from parachute and with his fighting gear. But he was very nervous. He was anxious about the way the wind was blowing. He wasn't quite sure. The young people wanted to get on with their equipment and put out the fire. He was hesitant. In the end, he was right. The wind changed. The cloud formations went the way he thought, and the fire started to come towards him. So, and then what did he do? Well, he could have run away like most of the youngsters did, and in fact, they perished as a result of it. What he did was, and quite unknown to the world at that time, he set fire to the ground around him. It burnt. He lay down in the soil, and the fire passed around him and over him, and he survived. So in those circumstances, when you know about stories like that, and there are many, you can adapt. You have to think. You use your instinct and your experience that's based on knowledge. It's not based on something plucked out of the ether on a sunny Monday. You offer leadership and support, and you try to give guidance to those around you. You look for people to collaborate with you and share that thought. You adjust. You focus on what's needed at the time, and enable the recovery and regeneration. Often, in his case, and the world has learnt, in Australia certainly they've learnt that this summer, for something that was a crisis, but much bigger than they thought, rather like the COVID-19 crisis. Innovate, adapt, utilize the learnings of others, change your mindset, bring on new technology or new patterns of work, so you're ready and prepared for regeneration and recovery. Repurpose your resources, as we did. Look at your management, empower people, create new tools. We've used new technology. We're empowering people. People even who are volunteering, having been furloughed, are now coming up with ideas which will be beneficial for our business in the future. So in answer to your question, how have things changed? Things have changed a lot, but this is not the first crisis that we've faced. We've reframed, we've pivoted, we're still learning, we're gathering information, and now we're preparing for the recovery and regeneration.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for that. So working out need and framing and building new partnerships and leveraging opportunities. I really appreciated what you said about innovating around your values as well. So I'm sure we'll come back to some of those things in our questions. Thank you. Now we're going to move to Ami. Now, Ami is founder of Innovation Warehouse, but Ami, you also work with a host of other organizations, individuals, offering support and mentoring. So it'll be interesting to hear how that might inform your perspective as well. So Ami, if you'd like to share your thoughts, please.
Now you can hear me, yeah? Unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So where to begin? So just to explain, I guess our business has the two sort of aspects to it. One is we're a co-working space for aspiring tech startups. We started 10 years ago, the first space to be doing that in London. We're a not-for-profit, so we're not a property company. And that's one part of what we do. The other part is what goes on inside is there's a lot of mentoring, there's a group of angels, And basically we help companies get ready for investment and open up open them up to investments from our angel groups and various other investment groups around us. So I think when we were sort of just about sort of in March, heading towards lockdown, one of our cohorts was approaching what they call their demo day, where they all do their pitch, their sort of Dragon's Den shtick, and they pitch to all the investors. Obviously, it was online, it was on Zoom, because obviously people weren't meeting by then, and a lot of them were coming to me and asking for feedback. What's it like when you pitch on Zoom? How do you hold people's attention? There are lots of challenges if people aren't actually sitting in a room. It's much easier for them to get distracted by other things. You know, they can shut down, they can switch off the screen and so forth. And in a number of cases, I had to tell people that, you know, your plan is, you know, it's nice, it's well presented, you know, you've done the course, you've done the material, but today it's absolutely irrelevant. Nobody is going to want to hear about this, because with all the uncertainty that's coming up, you know, nobody knows. Nobody knows how long this is going to go on for. Nobody knows if that market will exist, how that market will be affected, and so on. So advice, apart from you know, a number of cases where things wouldn't change, the general advice was actually, can you put your business plan on the shelf and let go? And I think that letting go is a really important capability. Also in what we heard Tony talking about, it's really, if you have that ability to let go, not to hang on to all kinds of things that beforehand were giving you security that you believed in, and you can just let go of that and kind of adjust to a new situation that's evolving. These guys, they're all very passionate about, you know, the companies that they've built and the products that they have and the value that they're going to offer to the market. And it's quite hard to let go of it. And you tell them, well, can you just park that for a while? And there was and look at what you can actually do in this situation. Because I think initially there was a window of opportunity. There probably still is a window of opportunity, where if you could do something useful, if you could have an impact, a positive impact, do good, really, really do good in a sense, you would also get rewarded for it. You would also get acknowledged for it. You would get applauded for it. So what I was telling them is, if you could find a way of doing something useful, it's an opportunity to get brand recognition, to be acknowledged as the people who have the ability to pivot, the people who have the ability to execute, and to be acknowledged for that. And then presumably when we start to come out of this, who are people going to want to invest in? Are they going to want to invest in the sort of people who just hibernated, or the people who actually took the bull by the horns and got on with something? So obviously we're talking about tech startups. I don't know, there's how many of you will know the app put out by called Ask Zoe by King's College, or it's affiliated with King's College. I mean, that app is incredibly simple. It's basically collecting data on the location of people with or without symptoms, and then with that data producing, you know, analyzing it and you know, making recommendations and understanding things. So I think there are like 3.5 million people using that app. That is about a weekend's worth of tech development. If you want to add a little bit onto that, maybe a week. So, you know, this was an opportunity. If you can go out there and do something useful in that sense. So this is the way that we were leading it. Let go of all the things that are precious to you and that you are relying on. And if you can make use of them, you look at what assets you have, what you can do, how you can be relevant. And in this very, very short window of opportunity when many people are panicking, many people don't know what to do, there's a vacuum in terms of lots and lots of things are not available and problems that need to be solved. So the entrepreneurial approach is to see, well, what have I got? What are my assets? What are my capabilities? Does it overlap in some way with my product? If so, great, I'll pivot my product. If not, leave the product on the shelf and go and do something useful. And it's kind of a very sort of beautiful time in that sense, because if you can do something good, the chances are that you'll get acknowledged and rewarded for it. So that, I guess, is the message that we were putting out to our community. Some examples, there's one company that was doing augmented reality in shopping malls. And they basically, tech, they built an app which is very successfully at the moment helping schedule deliveries of food baskets, food parcels to needy people in the Turkish community. There was another one, another initiative that we started. We have a robot that we use in our offices that can wander around the offices and talk to people. So we took some initiatives to see how that could be introduced into the NHS. We were thinking of the possibility of, you know, when people are dying, there's nobody near them, there's no way of getting their family to be able to come up close and talk to them. So took some initiatives to get that, you know, into the NHS agenda, and that process is going forward. Whether something will come out of it or not, I don't know, but that process has gone forward. Apart from, I mean, yeah, is that okay? Is that enough for the moment? I don't want to take up too much time, so perhaps I'll leave it at that for the moment.
That's great, Ami. Thank you very much for that. So hearing very clearly about letting go and thinking about your capabilities and what you can do, how you can be relevant, but also to do good, to be helpful. So thanks for that. And now we want to go over to Catherine. Now, Catherine, your situation is different yet again. As curator of the art collection at Linklaters, you've really had to think about how to reframe or pivot your role within the organization. So I will hand it over to you to tell us a bit more about that, please. Thanks.
So at Linklaters, we have a large art collection, which you know, is there for a couple of reasons, really, for the cultural enjoyment of those who work in the building and visit the building, but also as a way of engaging in the wider cultural community in the city and with a wider stakeholder at Linklaters. So obviously, as soon as the physical side of things go, it becomes, you know, slightly redundant. As soon as we're no longer there and able to experience it, then what's it doing? So I suppose I've looked at that in a couple of ways in the short term. So firstly, you know, just because we're no longer visiting the art collection, we're no longer there, I think it's still really important for larger companies and those who can to support creative communities. So we continue to support artists, we continue to buy artworks, because I think that the artistic community is on the whole mostly very small groups of people, self-employed people. On the whole, most artists work for themselves, or they do you know, a bit of freelance teaching or whatever, but there's, you know, they didn't suddenly have any kind of income. It all dried up overnight for them. So we continue to support them by trying to buy artwork, because I think that as a part of the community, you know, it all filters down from them. The creativity that we need in the City of London, that we have in all of our businesses, it comes from, you know, the artists in the studio in Hackney, will influence the advertising agency, who influences the fashion designer, who influences the web designer, and all those people decide how our businesses work. So it's really important that we keep the whole kind of the food chain going by supporting those artists. So I suppose, you know, carrying on working with them, but the one thing that's been really significant is how the artistic community has changed so much in such a small period of time. Within the last 7 weeks, you know, I think the existing structure that was there, which would have been, you know, lots of galleries. Traditionally, we were selling through galleries, art fairs, dealers, auction houses, and so on. And all of that, you know, has stopped trading, really. But also it looks unlikely that we're going to go back to that. You know, art fairs tend to be these huge, big tents. For example, the one in London, the big one in London is Frieze, in Regent's Park, a big fair where everyone crams in, 10,000 people in a small tent. You know, I don't think that's going to happen again, because it's a very different world now. Perhaps we're not going to all want to go into very cramped spaces like that. So I think there's been an enormous response from artists, and a very quick response that's changed the way they're all working, and it's become a much more direct way of working. So I would say that artists tend to have opened up their studios. For example, we can all go online and interact with artists, whereas in the old days, we'd know about an artist by seeing their work on a wall or something. We'd hear a name, we wouldn't know who they were. We might know what they looked like if we'd seen them on telly in an interview, but really we didn't have much connection. Nowadays, we're all on Instagram, we can see what they're doing, we can see their work, we can see them actually putting paint on paper. So the communications become much more direct. And so I suppose one of the things I've been trying to do is absorb some of that creativity and some of that new way of working into the businesses in London. So for example, in Linklater, I've been trying to kind of get people to look at how people are working, artists and other people like that are working, and trying to absorb some of that into the way they work, run more creative classes, drawing classes online, get them to share their experiences and become perhaps more creative, to help them perhaps work more creatively. I mean, one of the studies Culture Mile did some time ago was looking into creativity in business and how it works, and found that, you know, there's a huge increase in productivity just by having a creative environment around you. So I suppose finding ways of keeping that going was quite important. As far as, you know, in the long term goes, I think that's one of the key things that I want to look at, is how to kind of keep all of that going. But I suppose also to learn from the innovation that I've seen within the artistic community, which has been so extraordinary. I mean, to give you an example, one of the, there's an artist called Matthew Burrows, who quickly started an initiative called Artist Support Pledge. And that's an Instagram-led initiative. And what he did was, any artist can go online on Instagram and tag it with Artist Support Pledge and sell a piece of work for up to £200. And as soon as they reach £1,000 in sales, they pledge to spend another £200 on another artist. So it's a way of kind of keeping going. So he started that 7 weeks ago, and it's now become a worldwide phenomenon, with sales of even moderate sales of cautiously, you know, frame sales of £15 million to date, just from an artist in his studio thinking, how can we kind of get a community going? And so I think the very direct approach that artists are having, and the way that we can all see what they're doing, has really changed the way that they're trading, the way they're working. And perhaps because they're all sole traders, and perhaps they all can respond so quickly to initiatives, that they kind of show other people in a way what can be done. I think the innovation and creativity has been incredible. I think perhaps because they had very few resources, in that they were sole traders, and in some senses, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. Perhaps they were forced into this situation where they had to all find ways of doing things. But the other thing that's really struck me from looking at artists is the sense of the generosity and collaboration that's gone on. People have been really keen to help each other. And in the past, perhaps they felt like they were competing against each other, and then the galleries were competing against each other. Whereas now there's an enormous sense of community that's kind of sprung up. And to go back to Artist Support Pledge as an example, it's because the artists really want to help each other and help themselves. And then they really bought into this idea of how it works. And in other things that aren't necessarily monetized yet, you know, there are lots of other initiatives that are going on, and I'll give you some examples. So there's an artist called Jared Schiller, who is a filmmaker, working mainly with artists and contemporary sculptors and so on. Obviously had nothing to do suddenly, living in Kent with a chicken coop, and he put out a kind of open call on Instagram to who wanted to kind of submit some artworks for his chickens to become the new gallery. I'm going to show you a little picture, which is, can we see that? Oh, hang on a second. And he had huge amounts of artists, and not just ordinary artists, you know, really world-class, big-name artists, all sending in these works. Performance artists sending in videos. Another artist sent in these little words that had to be written on the side of all these seeds and then fed to the chickens. All kinds of ideas, and that's become a kind of huge phenomenon that people are kind of, you know, tuning in every day to kind of look at his chickens and what they're all up to. And I think that kind of idea of collaboration and innovation has been really exciting. And even though, you know, he's not going to make his fortune by that, but it's a way of changing the way we do things, disrupting the industry, I guess, and then finding different solutions, which artists traditionally are the free thinkers, and they've been really good at this kind of thing. So I think that perhaps long-term, looking at them as a way of finding different ways of working, finding different ways of thinking about things, could be an inspiration for us in this time.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So real sense of collaboration and community and learning from artists and absorbing that creativity into whatever work that you might be doing. Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the panelists to share their thoughts. Now, just a reminder to anyone who's attending, please put your questions in the chat box. But I actually have a question that I'd like to kick us off with, and it's very much related to what Catherine has just been speaking about. So really to ask all three of you, what role is creativity playing in reframing or adapting your business or your work? And how have you tapped into your own creativity during this time? So Tony, do you want to go first and give us an answer to that one?
Well, not being very creative myself, I have to rely on others. And I think I'm tapping into that same thing that Catherine was talking about. Finding solutions because of out of necessity. I think the community, generosity, collaboration are all things that one can rely on in a crisis, and that we did. So I've been a long-term supporter of something called the Academy of Ideas, formerly the Institute of Ideas. And their debating matters couldn't happen because live debates couldn't happen in schools and colleges. So they've made it digital. They've got their book club, they've got their salon debates, and they've moved to a much more digital way of working. And as a result of that, have widened the audience and have repurposed their thinking. Equally, the London Indian Film Festival, again, you know, these are cinemas, films that want to come out, sometimes they become very successful, but they need public airing. And how does one do that when the cinemas are closed? Simply by going digital. And it's the first time. It means that they are already, just in 3 days of going digital, gaining new audiences, global audiences for a film festival which is very well recognized, but now has been repurposed as they're pivoted. And that global reach applies for just about anything. You know, photographers, we've got 3 photographers in residence. We've got a lady called Robin Eckhart, who's more traditional artwork, and Suzanne Porter and Hazel Thompson, both photographic, one a photojournalist. And instead of having exhibitions, as I was hoping in my hotels, we're now moving that onto a digital platform, so that all of our customers when they book, when they want to get onto our community platform, they can get access to and buy the artwork, some of which will be present in our hotels. And if you take something that was just about to happen, so we were on the 29th of May, we were about to have a cricket festival, invite all our corporate clients, international and other cricketers. We've been doing it since the early 90s, but clearly that can't happen. Instead now, there are going to be international cricketers at Lord's, former England captains and others, having a discussion, raising money for NHS and other worthy charitable causes. And that gives an audience far bigger than I could offer on a lovely cricket square in Vincent Square in Westminster. So this is now a global audience involving international players and highlighting a cause which otherwise would not have been perhaps so well known. So in summary, I think that collaborating with other people, utilizing their skills, and in art forms, particularly film, you can say things in a way to a much broader audience than you could do so independently. And that's what we've been doing. And those are just examples, some examples of what we've been doing.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Tony. Catherine, do you want to jump in next? You've spoken quite a lot about creativity, but anything further you might want to bring in?
Yes, I mean, I think that, it's been really encouraging to see how much creativity there is in normal life. So many people are, drawing rainbows or making their own face masks, or everyone's a film critic, or all these kind of things that are happening. People are doing things at home, really engaging in culture and creativity and sharing that. I think it's really nice to have that all being shared. And I think that allowing that kind of division between your professional and your creative life to merge slightly. And I think that's the kind of thing that'd be really good to continue and to encourage to continue. So there's not this kind of line between the two, and that you can keep discussing and allow yourself to think more freely and be influenced by other things that aren't just your job. I think a second thing is that I think there's been a difference in communication. For me, I've seen that very much artist-led, but I think the way we communicate has changed in that it's much more direct. So people are making more videos, people are doing more Zoom calls, and we get very much a look into people's lives. You get to look into someone's home, you see what's in their bookshelves, you get to see them doing all these normal things. So you get to see much more about them. It's much more direct. I think perhaps there's been a slight fatigue with this kind of overspun, over-PR'd communication that we get from so many corporates. So nowadays, in the last few weeks, it's been very direct. People are making videos, they're talking, it's all very much very personal. And I like the creativity that's brought out in each person, and the direct line we all feel connected with each other. I hope that will continue.
Great, thank you. And Ami, do you want to speak to creativity at this time in your work and how you're tapping in?
Just to say that for me, I don't really differentiate between creativity in a cultural, artistic sense and in any other sense, in business or any other field. I think it's a similar process, but with different tools, and possibly having a little bit more time, to sort of think things over and come up with ideas and act on one's ideas. I think there is some potential, to express oneself in that way. But I think also in terms of business survival, pivoting, whatever it is, it's all creativity. I personally don't differentiate between them at all.
Great, thank you. So we have a question here from Integrity International Group. So Ami, you spoke about how virtual working has its downfalls and spoke about some tech. And Tony, you spoke about needing new tech as well to be ready for the new norm. So could you enlighten us as to what we might need in the new norm? And this is directed towards Tony, please.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting question because, of course, hotels are real estate. They don't move. It's not like technology or anything else that's fluid artwork that can be anywhere at any place. You've got bricks and mortar and assets with substantial value, and you would wonder how you repurpose them. But actually, you don't need to necessarily repurpose them. You need to look at the ways of working. So we have been working very well with an innovative technology product called Optimizer, and it does what it says. So the Optimizer allows us to engage with our workforce in a much more meaningful way. We have all our data in one place, so people can access it. It means that all our customers are in one place. If we want to segment any one bit of it, we can. And it also means that from my point of view, I can manage people in a much more coherent and sensible way. We can run events similar to this. We can do a whole range of different things with this tool that we probably would not have utilized to the extent it would, and it wouldn't have got us so embedded in our DNA of our business had it not been for this kind of situation. So I think it is not just necessity, although I agree that it does sharpen the appetite. But even in organisations which are cricket clubs or test matches that can't be played at Lord's, even if it's hotels with bedrooms that you can't sell, there are other things that, in collaboration with other people, partners and other people who can help you to deliver something to the market that you perhaps, and to utilise that you otherwise wouldn't. And finally, what I'd say is that this is not just a one-off crisis. This is probably going to be another crisis that's going to come. So my advice would be that whatever learnings you've had and whatever experience whatever intuition that you're developing, you'll probably need it again.
Great, thank you. So we have another question. How do you help your team cope with anxiety during this crisis? Catherine, would you like to jump in on this one first?
I suppose, my angle is always the more creative angle. So I suppose that, we've done a lot of drawing classes, a lot of communication in that sense, of trying to kind of get people to do more creative things. There's a really lovely series of life drawing classes that are about to start at Linklaters. Which are, a way of perhaps bringing people together and getting them to do things. I mean, I'm not, as far as those are all the things that help manage that kind of thing. Nothing specifically focused on anxiety, because it's all a bit too vague, I suppose.
Ami, would you like to share some thoughts?
So for me, I think I've been through I've had a lot of my own anxiety for various reasons. Actually, particularly because this whole thing started for me sort of mid-January, because I have a son in Hong Kong with a very pregnant wife, and another son in Shantou, which is a city in China about just under 1,000 kilometers from Wuhan. So I've kind of been aware of this stuff for quite a long time, and it's built up a lot of anxiety in what's going on over there, and not being able to do anything about it. And then when it all came here, what I found is that just by talking about it, by talking about my own anxiety, by being vulnerable, by showing my vulnerability, it really opened up, it really made me feel a lot better, because I could own it. And the people that I was talking to, it sort of gave them the ability to talk about their own fears and anxieties. So for me, it's sort of just being human, and just being human, being vulnerable, and sort of looking people in the eye. And I think when people talk about their anxieties, then they stop being anxieties, they become fears, they become things. It stops being rabbits in the headlight. So all across the board, just being able to talk to people, and if they don't want to talk, then initiate the sharing in terms of what you're going through. And I found that has worked incredibly well.
Thanks for sharing that with us. So I have a question actually from Culture Mile. You are all part of the Culture Mile and the City of London community. Has this impacted your approach to adapting? Or what might being part of this community mean to your work and business as you look towards the future? Do any of you want to jump in first on that one?
I have just a quick one, and to say that London and organisations like Culture Mile are facing challenges now. So whether you're the London Chamber of Commerce or the Business Improvement District or London and Partners or any other membership group, your members are wondering what value you're getting and what you're giving for that. As a result of that, I think that there's going to be more collaboration. And so I think you might find that not just us as a hotel group and a hospitality sector, but actually we'll connect as we are right now with law firms, with innovator funds, and with others. And I think that we'll find that in our community and our reach will get much bigger as a result of this paradox of being able to link much closer with other organisations. So I think the Culture Mile and the venues and the artists and all the other parts that play in that creative tapestry of London are now, as Catherine said, getting much closer. And that collaboration rather than isolation is what we're seeing in business, even if the opposite is happening in our real personal lives.
Thank you. Collaboration is certainly something we hope to see growing and evolving as we move forwards. Catherine or Amy, anything further you want to say to that?
Well, I just want to say that Culture Mile is quite a sort of diverse group of organisations, and just because of the location, I don't know if there's just been one unifying factor just because of the location, because we're so many different kinds of businesses and different kinds of challenges. But I think what happens naturally is that you look for the network, you look for the people who have common interests, who share things, and then you act as a group. So an example of that was we organised a group of all of the tenants of the building that we're in, and collaborated in that way because we have something in common. We organised another group, or we're part of organising another group of lots and lots of smaller co-working spaces in London. Normally we don't really talk that much to each other because we're competitors, but suddenly we've got a common interest because we're a sector that wasn't covered or wasn't properly covered in any of the government schemes. So together we came together and started a lobby to kind of promote, talk about the interests that weren't being covered. So I think naturally one does go to one's communities, and it's not just that there's so many different communities. Culture Mile, just because it's Culture Mile on its own, I think it's so diverse that it's kind of difficult to find something that you can just go into Culture Mile and find what you're looking for. But it's good that it's there because you can put the word out, and perhaps if there are things that you're looking for and you can't find elsewhere, you can put the word out there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the creative industries are really essential part of London's business future. I think they're really the lifeblood, and what differentiates London from other cities. I think it's a really powerful strength, and I think what Culture Mile does is it recognises that, and it supports all of that, and it supports it alongside businesses. So it lets businesses work out how to firstly support them, and also how to incorporate that creativity into their own structures, which I think will be the key to the success long term of all those businesses. So I think Culture Mile and its success is really important in the city and in all throughout, you know, and in London.
I'm sure that we're all, those of us who are based in different areas, wherever we may be, thinking about what it means to be rooted in a place. And when we aren't able to be there, how do we still maintain that connection? So we are nearly out of time. I'm going to ask one final question that has come in from the audience, which is, how do you future-proof your business and make sure it is ready for upcoming challenges? So, Ami, shall we get you in on this one first?
Well, unprecedented is unprecedented, and I think this is, you know, this is pretty unprecedented. So it's hard to, you know, it's some things you just can't be ready for. But I think, you know, being ready for the unknown and for the unexpected, and you know, the ability to adapt, you know, the ability to I think it's more skills based than something very, very tangible, because this time it's COVID-19. Next time, you know, who knows? Nobody saw this coming except Bill Gates, but nobody listened 3 years ago. But you did you did ask in terms of preparing, you know, some takeaways. So perhaps there are a few things that I just wrote down. So perhaps I'll use this opportunity to share them. In terms of governance schemes, it's important to get ready, not to rush into things. I think it's really important to have an open mind and be ready to adopt long-term change, not just hang on and wait for things to come back to where they were before, but to understand that these are shifts that you know, that they're going to have longer-term impact. So letting go. I mean, just the example that I wanted to give is bank accounts. I think we've all had got really, really annoyed with our banks at one time or another, but nobody ever changes their bank account. It's just nobody can be bothered to do that. But you can see that now, for example, in the shift from physical to working remotely, everybody, or loads and loads of people have made that change. If you're able to make that little change and let go of your old way of working, then it's so much easier to move forward. And the other thing is to keep a very positive mindset. So I find that it's actually quite easy to get sucked into this very sort of negative thing if you watch the news, if you watch too much news, if you're kind of obsessing around the stats. It's very easy to get sucked downwards. And, you know, as bad as things may be, or as negative or as difficult as things may be, it's really important to keep a positive outlook. And I use the analogy of the caterpillar. The caterpillar, when it reaches a sort of state of saturation, it starts devouring itself, and all of its systems break down. And some of the cells in the caterpillar, they're called imaginal cells. And instead of hanging on to the old systems and the way things used to work, they kind of go through this metamorphosis and start thinking about how they might be. And it's really important to be able to have that kind of attitude, I think, in a situation like this. Not just how do we get it back to the way it was before, but how can we take what's happened and make it into something better, you know, the proverbial butterfly.
Great, thank you, Ami. Catherine, do you want to speak to your top tips and/or future proofing as we wrap up here?
I've been, you know, so inspired by the artistic community and the ways they've innovated and responded, the esprit de corps, the community and the generosity within it. And I've you know, I think it's remarkable how they've changed their industry in such a small space of time. and come up with some really positive ways of working. So I would say, for me, I look to them for inspiration. I would say, as both Tony and Ami have been saying, innovation is key, and being open-minded and collaborate. That's also really important. Just keep collaborating, even if it looks like it's going nowhere. Just keep that open all the time.
Okay, thank you. And Tony, would you like to bring us home with your top tips and future-proofing thoughts?
Yeah, well, yeah, thanks for letting me start and end. So I would say trust your instinct and be informed. That's the first thing. Don't ignore the actual risk, but you'll probably be able to rely upon the experience that you've had in the past to colour your future. And so your intuition is not to be ignored. I think if you're leading other people, then offer them support and clarity, focus on what the need is for the future and the plan for the future and what measures should be taken. And I agree exactly with what Ami said, that even if it's in a building like a hotel, it can be repurposed. There is something else. You don't have to go back to doing the same thing that you were doing or you were thinking of doing. And so be innovative. And most of all, I think we should all learn from this, that there are things that are our top priorities. Our priority right now is our health, our personal well-being, and the relationships of our loved ones. And I think that is going to come out of this. And along with the values that you are now able to impose upon your future are what are going to come out of this rather dreadful, treacherous situation and come out with some positive impact.
Okay, thank you, Tony. And thank you to all of our panelists who have shared their experience with us today, and to all of you who have attended. I hope the discussion has brought some useful insight or inspired new thinking as you continue to navigate through this challenging time. If you do have any follow-on questions, please do email them via the Eventbrite email you received when you registered. We will then direct these to Tony, Ami, and Catherine. We will also follow up with any resources that were mentioned today in an email to you in the next week or so. Please do check out the Culture Mile website, and specifically our Grow page. We do have some more examples there of how businesses across the City of London are addressing key issues with creativity and innovation. And also to make sure you know to listen out for Culture Mile's upcoming Radio Local, which is a hyper-local radio station broadcasting out to the world. And that will be from 30th of May to the 12th of June. So again, a big thank you to Tony and to Catherine and to Ami and Nadia here to help London for making today possible. It's been really great to hear your views. So thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.